On November 19, 2024, Vladimir Putin signed a document that defense analysts at the Pentagon are calling the most dangerous shift in nuclear policy since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Russia's updated nuclear doctrine doesn't just lower the threshold for atomic weapons use, it specifically targets any nation providing military aid to countries attacking Russian territory. Translation: every Javelin missile, every HIMARS system, every intelligence briefing the United States sends to Ukraine now carries the explicit risk of nuclear retaliation. The man behind this calculation sits in the Kremlin, surrounded by advisors who've watched NATO expand eastward for 3 decades. Putin's inner circle includes Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, who argued for this doctrine change as early as March 2024, and Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev, the former KGB officer who views Western military aid as direct acts of war against Russia. These aren't desperate men making rash decisions. They're strategic planners who've spent months crafting a policy designed to fracture the Western alliance supporting Ukraine. The timing reveals everything about their calculation. Biden administration officials had just authorized Ukraine to use American-supplied ATACMS missiles against targets inside Russia. Within 72 hours, Putin's signature transformed the global nuclear landscape. The doctrine specifically states that any conventional attack on Russia supported by a nuclear power will be considered a joint attack by both the attacking nation and its nuclear-armed backer. What makes this doctrine unprecedented isn't the nuclear threat itself. Russia has rattled its nuclear saber dozens of times since February 2022. The difference lies in the specificity and legal framework Putin has constructed. Unlike previous threats that remained vague and theatrical, this doctrine creates explicit tripwires that automatically justify nuclear response. Article 4 of the updated policy states that Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons against any non-nuclear state if that attack is conducted with the participation or support of a nuclear state. Every NATO intelligence officer understands the implications. When a Ukrainian soldier fires an American-made missile at a Russian target using American satellite guidance, Putin now has legal justification under Russian law to consider it an American attack on Russian soil. But would he actually use it? The answer came in less than 24 hours. On November 20th, Ukrainian forces fired 6 ATACMS missiles at a Russian military facility in Bryansk Oblast. 5 were intercepted, 1 wasn't. What happened next shocked Western intelligence agencies. Within 3 hours, Russian state television wasn't just showing the damage. They were broadcasting a step-by-step explanation of how this single missile strike now justified nuclear retaliation under the new doctrine. Maria Zakharova, Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman, declared that the United States had crossed a red line by providing targeting data for the strike. The message was unmistakable. America wasn't just supplying weapons anymore. Under Russia's new framework, America was now a direct combatant. European leaders grasped the implications immediately. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, already hesitant about providing long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine, told his cabinet on November 21st that the doctrine change fundamentally altered the risk calculation for all NATO members. French President Emmanuel Macron, who had previously discussed sending French troops to Ukraine, quietly shelved those plans after emergency consultations with military advisors. The doctrine wasn't just changing Russian behavior, it was fracturing Western resolve by forcing each NATO member to weigh nuclear risk against Ukrainian aid. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak admitted in a closed-door briefing that Warsaw was reconsidering its role as a transit hub for Western weapons shipments. The fear wasn't just nuclear war, It was becoming the specific target that triggered one. But the real genius of Putin's strategy lies deeper than nuclear intimidation. Intelligence analysts at the CIA's Russia desk have identified the doctrine as part of a broader campaign to isolate Ukraine from its supporters. By making every Western nation a potential nuclear target for their aid, Russia has created what strategists call participation costs for continued support. Dr. Michael Kaufman, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, warned in congressional testimony that the doctrine represents the weaponization of nuclear ambiguity to achieve conventional military objectives. Each NATO member must now calculate whether their specific contribution to Ukraine's defense is worth risking nuclear escalation. The mathematics of mutual defense become exponentially more complex when every act of support carries existential risk. The human cost of this calculation is already visible in Ukraine's eastern front lines. Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Dmitriev, a Ukrainian artillery officer operating near Donetsk, told reporters that ammunition supplies from NATO allies have decreased by 30% since the doctrine announcement. American officials deny any policy changes, but Ukrainian commanders report delayed shipments and reduced training support for advanced weapons systems. The psychological impact on Ukrainian forces is measurable. Soldiers who once counted on unlimited Western backing now question whether their next offensive will trigger the nuclear response that ends all support. Russian forces, meanwhile, have grown bolder in their attacks on Ukrainian positions, calculating that Western restraint will increase as nuclear risks escalate. The doctrine's most insidious effect targets American domestic politics. Republican senators who previously supported Ukrainian aid now cite nuclear risks as justification for reducing military assistance. But Putin's real target wasn't European capitals or American weapons shipments. Intelligence intercepts reveal he was hunting bigger game, the personal reputations of Western leaders themselves. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky introduced legislation on November 28 requiring congressional approval for any weapons transfer that could trigger Russia's nuclear doctrine. The measure gained 12 Republican co-sponsors within 48 hours. Here's what made this terrifying. Putin had successfully weaponized America's own democratic process against itself. Every congressional debate about Ukraine aid now carried an implicit question: are we willing to risk nuclear war for Kyiv? Democratic leaders found themselves trapped, defending policies that could end civilization, while Republicans seized on nuclear fears to justify positions they'd held since day one. Putin wasn't just fracturing NATO. He was turning American democracy into his most effective weapon against Ukrainian survival. What emerges from this new reality is a fundamental shift in how nuclear powers project influence. Traditional deterrence theory assumed nuclear weapons would prevent major power conflicts through mutual assured destruction. Putin has inverted this logic, using nuclear threats to enable conventional aggression while constraining his opponent's response options. The doctrine creates what strategists call escalation dominance. Russia can always threaten greater escalation than its opponents are willing to risk. Every Western decision-maker must now weigh their actions against the possibility of nuclear response, while Russian commanders operate with the knowledge that their nuclear umbrella protects increasingly aggressive conventional operations. The November doctrine change represents more than policy adjustment. It signals Russia's transition from nuclear deterrence to nuclear coercion as a primary tool of statecraft. Unlike the Cold War era, when nuclear weapons served to prevent conflicts, Putin has weaponized atomic threats to enable territorial conquest while paralyzing international response. The West faces a choice between accepting Russian nuclear blackmail or risking escalation to levels unseen since 1962. There is no middle path that preserves both Ukrainian sovereignty and Western security without confronting the new nuclear reality Putin has created. The question isn't whether Putin will use nuclear weapons. It's whether the West will allow nuclear threats to determine the outcome of conventional conflicts in the 21st century. And Putin is betting everything that fear will triumph over principle when the stakes become existential.